Elena Hardy, a young woman brimming with ambition, was eager to leave her tight-knit Arizona family behind and embrace a vibrant new life in Harlem. With the bustling streets of New York City at her feet, it seemed like the world was her oyster. But beneath the surface of her fresh start, something sinister was taking root. As her relationship with Fernando Minero deepened, so did the danger. What began as an innocent neighborly bond soon spiraled into a nightmare far darker than she could have ever imagined. Stay with me as we unravel the unexpected twists of Elena's story and the shocking events that ultimately sealed her tragic fate. Elena Catherine Hardy Crandall was born on May 14, 1994, in Santana Valley, an unincorporated community in Arizona with a population of just over 100,000. Raised in a warm and close-knit family, Elena was the daughter of Lauren Hardy and Anitra Crandall, with siblings who shared in her upbringing. She spent her childhood and teenage years in this quiet town, where she graduated from Santana Foothills High School in 2012. At school, Elena was known for her dedication and determination. After graduating, she made the bold decision to leave Santana Valley and move to New York City in 2015 to chase her dream of becoming a nurse. During her time in the city, she lived in two different neighborhoods. In August 2020, Elena settled into a new apartment on the top floor of a 4-story building in Harlem, located on the west side of Manhattan. According to her family, Elena was genuinely happy in New York. Living in a big city had always been a dream of hers, and she quickly fell in love with everything the city had to offer. The vibrant culture, art, and diverse food scene were among the things she adored the most. Madison Elder, Elena's close cousin, remembered her as an outgoing, cheerful, and energetic young woman who brought light to everyone around her. Madison recalled that Elena had a natural ability to make friends and was thrilled about starting her new life in the city. On the first floor of the same building where Elena had moved, lived a 25-year-old man named Fernando Minero. True to her nature, Elena quickly became acquainted with most of her neighbors, including Fernando. What began as a casual, friendly connection slowly developed into something deeper. At some point that same year, Elena and Fernando began dating. Although they still lived in separate apartments within the same building, they spent much of their time together, mostly in Elena's place. Initially, their relationship seemed strong, but over time, it became increasingly unstable and tumultuous. Neighbors and friends of Elena later reported that Fernando grew increasingly controlling and at times became violent toward her. Despite becoming a couple, Elena and Fernando were fundamentally different people. Elena was social, outgoing, and enjoyed meeting new people, often surrounded by friends. In contrast, Fernando was quieter and notably possessive. According to reports, their relationship lasted about 8 months, but Fernando's controlling behavior surfaced early on. He became uncomfortable with Elena talking to certain friends and often tried to restrict her from going to places when invited by others. Fernando also took control of Elena's phone, responding to messages from her friends without her consent. When he saw invitations for Elena to go out, he would secretly reply on her behalf, pretending to be her, and decline the offers. Beyond his controlling behavior, Fernando also displayed reckless tendencies. He frequently mixed medication with alcohol and would ride his motorcycle at dangerously high speeds while under the influence. Fernando even had an accident, though it wasn't serious. As the months passed, arguments and fights between the couple became more frequent, leading to a constant cycle of breaking up and making up. With each reconciliation, however, the tension grew and the conflicts escalated. During this period, the police were called to Elena's apartment 6 times due to incidents of domestic violence. It was evident that the situation between the couple had spiraled out of control, and it seemed inevitable that something tragic would eventually happen. The turning point came on May 13, 2021. That day, Elena and Fernando had an intense argument in her apartment. Fernando, visibly enraged, forcibly grabbed Elena, locked them both in the apartment, and took her phone, preventing her from calling for help. In a fit of rage, Fernando began destroying everything in sight. He smashed doors, shattered electronics, and threw glass bottles at the walls. While he was preoccupied with wrecking the apartment, Elena seized the opportunity to escape. She managed to call 911 and get help, prompting police officers to arrive at the scene. scene. Fernando was arrested and faced multiple charges, including unlawful imprisonment, property damage, assault, and second-degree harassment. Given Fernando's history, everyone assumed he would remain in custody for a while, at least for a few months, especially since the police had been called to Elena's apartment 6 times. However, the judge overseeing the case did not view Fernando as a significant threat and decided to release him. Following his release, a temporary restraining order was issued, barring Fernando from approaching Elena. Despite the restraining order, Fernando repeatedly ignored it. Elena made every effort to distance herself from him, cutting off all communication. However, living in the same building made it difficult for her to fully escape him. On several occasions, when Elena would return to the building, Fernando would be sitting on the stairs, waiting for her, clearly trying to provoke her. He also bombarded her with hundreds of messages and constant calls, telling her he was watching her. He criticized Elena's clothing choices, sometimes demanding that she go home and change her outfit. At other times, he used emotional manipulation to try and draw her closer. When that failed, his anger only intensified. A week before the tragic events, Fernando made over 80 phone calls to Elena, refusing to stop even when she ignored him. His relentless attempts to contact her continued, regardless of her wishes. According to her family, Elena was feeling incredibly happy that week. She had just passed an exam to become a nursing assistant and was only a few months away from completing her long-awaited degree. On May 19, 2021, after relentless persuasion, Fernando managed to convince Elena to let him come to her apartment for what she believed would be a simple conversation. What was meant to be a calm conversation quickly escalated into a heated argument. In response, Elena decided to ask Fernando to leave. Initially, he seemed to comply without resistance. However, a few hours later, around 8:05 p.m., Fernando returned to her apartment and tried to break down the door to force his way inside. In that moment of desperation, Elena called the police, who rushed to the scene. When the officers arrived at 8:15 p.m., Fernando had already fled the scene. He had jumped over a fence at the back of the building and rode off on his motorcycle, heading in an unknown direction. Despite Elena's clear distress, the officers simply documented her complaint and left without attempting to locate Fernando or alerting other patrols in the area to search for him. It's crucial to note that the temporary restraining order was still in effect, meaning Fernando should have been considered a fugitive for violating it. The New York Police Department later clarified that the officers had filed both a complaint report and a domestic incident report, as Fernando had already fled by the time they arrived. Around 8:45 p.m., just 30 minutes later, the police received another call regarding the same building. This time, the call came from neighbors who reported hearing frantic screams coming from Elena's apartment. When the officers returned to the scene, they discovered Elena in a critical condition. She was found lying on the ground outside her apartment, covered in blood. Elena had suffered 7 stab wounds, mostly to her neck, and had multiple bite marks across her body. Elena was rushed to Metropolitan Hospital by ambulance, but tragically, she passed away before reaching the hospital. Fernando was also found at the scene, suffering from severe knife wounds, injuries he sustained during a desperate attempt by Elena to defend herself. He was taken to the hospital in critical condition, but eventually recovered. After his recovery, Fernando was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including the murder of Elena. The investigation revealed that Fernando gained access to Elena's apartment by climbing the fire escape and entering through an open window, catching her off guard. Armed with an air pistol and a knife, he ambushed Elena in a fit of rage and obsession. He stabbed her 7 times, mostly in the neck, and bit her in several places on her body. Despite the overwhelming fear and pain, Elena did not give up. She fought back with all her strength, managing to grab the knife and stab Fernando in the chest. Sadly, her brave attempt wasn't enough to stop his violence. Severely wounded and desperate, Elena summoned one last burst of courage and managed to escape her apartment, but Fernando pursued her without hesitation. He chased her down the building's hallway, bloodied and still holding the knife. Elena's screams rang out, echoing through the corridors, alarming neighbors who, horrified, quickly called the police. The tragic events that followed are now known. Elena's family was left devastated upon learning what had happened. They struggled to comprehend the horrific manner in which their beloved daughter had been taken from them. Lauren Hardy, Elena's father, revealed that he had desperately tried to free his daughter from the toxic and dangerous relationship with Fernando. He explained that he had numerous conversations with Elena, urging her to sever all ties and fully distance herself from him. Lauren described Fernando as a jealous, unhinged psychopath who had manipulated his inherently kind daughter into a destructive and controlling relationship. Madison Elder, Elena's cousin, described Fernando as intensely controlling and possessive. She shared that he pressured Elena to distance herself from her friends, attempting to isolate her in order to control every aspect of her life. A friend of Fernando's also noted a disturbing change in his behavior, saying he became increasingly impatient and irritable. The director of a domestic violence support center in New York City strongly criticized the police's handling of the situation, highlighting their failure to act appropriately given the circumstances. She argued that there was no justification or reasonable explanation for the officers leaving Elena alone and vulnerable without conducting a thorough investigation. The director emphasized that the police should have remained with Elena for at least an hour after the incident, actively searching for Fernando and assessing the immediate danger she was in. The director argued that this failure demonstrated a lack of commitment to protecting the victim from her abuser, describing the New York Police Department's response as grossly inadequate. She further criticized the officers for being unprepared and poorly trained to handle such a serious case, which ultimately contributed to the tragic loss of a young woman's life. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Lauren Hardy, Elena's father, started a GoFundMe campaign to raise money for transporting Elena's body from New York to Arizona and to cover funeral costs. The campaign raised a total of $21,500. Elena Hardy's funeral was held on June 19, 2021, at Gilbert Memorial Park Cemetery. The ceremony was attended by dozens of mourners, including family, friends, and college classmates. On May 14, 2024, Fernando was found guilty of second-degree murder, first-degree robbery, second-degree robbery, and attempted first-degree murder. On June 20, 2024, the Manhattan District Attorney announced that Fernando Minero, then 29 years old, had been sentenced to 40 years in prison. With this sentence, he will not be eligible for release until 2061, when he will be about 66 years old.